Good afternoon. Welcome to the regular Friday program of the City Club of Portland. I'm Mary Kramer, your president. This afternoon, I'd like to take a moment to express our sadness and extend our sympathy to the family of Selena Autumn upon her death. Selena was an articulate and dedicated advocate for the arts, who served as director of the Portland Metropolitan Arts Commission for 9 years and as a deputy chair of the National Endowment for the Arts. She was an active City Club member who served on our Board of Governors. Perhaps the Oregonian expressed our feelings best in their drawing of Portlandia weeping. We shall miss her. Our first order of business today is to introduce new members. As I call their names, I'd like for them to stand. I'll ask the audience to hold their applause until all are introduced. First of all, we have Alfred Calabrea, Vice President, Sulzer Bingham. Alfred. Edward Ferrero, Attorney, Becker, Hunt, and Hess. Nancy Graybeal, Deputy Forest Supervisor, Gifford Pinchot National Forest. John Holloway, Engineering Manager, Indepac Incorporated. Randall Mullen, Director of Housing for the Portland Development Commission, City of Portland. Paul Rees, Project Manager, Aaron Fagree and Associates, Architects. And Amy Tykson, Marketing Consultant. Please join me in welcoming our new members. I'd like to thank City Club members who served as recruiters. They are Lynn Nelson Gardner, Lee Hess, Mary McCarthy, Marlene Mitchell, and Chris Topkin. We have a few announcements today. First of all, about some upcoming programs. Next Friday, Governor Neil Goldschmidt will deliver his farewell address to Oregonians as he prepares to leave office after 4 years at the helm of the state. There were applications for reservations published in the bulletin. If you want to come to this program, we suggest you call quickly. We are fast approaching a sellout status. We will be here in the Portland Hilton Grand Ballroom. Friday, December 21, is our City Club annual holiday program. It's a real treat. We'll have a potpourri of music and dance talent for you, and so we hope that you will join us for that program. It's very special. Our standing committee, Arts and Culture, is planning this event as they have done in the past, and it is a treat for all of us that is very special. For that program, we will be at the Benson Hotel, the Mayfair Room. On your tables today are the brochures for the second class of leadership development. It's called Pathways to Leadership. This course was developed for City Club, and it is based on Stephen Covey's work and his book entitled The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. It helps people increase their capacity to motivate others and to lead. The course will begin January 10th with a full-day session, and then there will be 4 half-day sessions that follow. The class size is limited to 21, so if you're interested, take a brochure, fill it out, and send it in as soon as possible. If you have other questions, please feel free to call Nancy Hedin at City Club office. Or perhaps you want to talk to one of the City Club members who has taken the course. Some people you might know are Patty Bedient, Sarah Cogan, Anna McManus, Dale Victor, and William Walker. Any of those folks would be happy to answer questions. There's another piece of information on your table, and that's a Merrillhurst College Bulletin. It's there because we have a course that is sponsored by City Club and Merrillhurst that will be offered again next term. The course is called Discourses in Public Affairs, Issues and Answers. You may enroll in this course and get graduate or undergraduate credit, or you may audit. The course is directed by State Representative Mike Burton, who is also Assistant to the President at Merrillhurst, and John Sinclair, Chairman of the Department of Humanities. Students who take this course come to the Friday programs, then they retire to the City Club office and have a seminar, which Mike Burton and John Sinclair facilitate, and many of our speakers join the class for more discussion about the topic of the day. This course is limited too. The enrollment size is 20, so if you're interested, call Merrillhurst Student Services Office at 636-8141. This week in our bulletin, we also published a survey questionnaire about ballot measure reports. We'd like for you to fill them out and get them into the City Club office as soon as possible. We're interested in knowing what impact our ballot measures have had upon the membership. We appreciate your cooperation sending them in. Our board host today is Chuck Williams, member of the Board of Governors and media officer for Good Samaritan Hospital. He'll have the privilege of asking the first question. The second question today will be asked by Regina Hauser, who is chair of the Energy and Environment Committee and an attorney with the firm of Schwabe, Williamson, and Wyatt. As usual, we will open to questions from City Club members after our speakers' prepared remarks. Preference will be given to those people who go to the mic, but there are cards on your table if you would like to submit a written question for after the speech. Club staffers will pick up the questions if you'll hold them up after our speaker's remarks. Now for today's program. Shootout at the Water Hole. That's a title that conjures up a traditional Hollywood gunfight, perhaps even with John Wayne. But there are a couple of other films that we can remember in our lifetime about water rights. Do you remember Chinatown or the Mellow Beanfield War? Back here at Oregon, water rights are being discussed at length. Southern Californians every once in a while mention that they're interested in the Columbia River as a potential source of water. But we need water to sustain ourselves, our agricultural industry, and our fish and wildlife. Once again, we hit competing interest groups. What's right? What's fair? What's an intelligent water rights law? Today, our guests will shed some light on the subject. We'll hear first from Roger Bachman, who is a member of the Oregon Water Resource Commission. Roger is a longtime City Club member and senior account manager for graphic media. We'll also hear from Thomas Simmons, co-founder of WaterWatch of Oregon. Mr. Simmons retired from the U.S. Navy, settled in Oregon, and became an activist in water policy. He was a participant in the development of in-stream water rights legislation. Finally, we'll hear from former State Representative Kip Lombard of Ashland, Oregon. He's an attorney in Ashland and has been a member of the Western States Water Council. Presently, he lobbies for the Oregon Water Resources Congress and is a member of the Oregon Cattlemen's Association. Mr. Bachman will begin. Please join me in welcoming our speakers.
Thank you, Mary. My job this afternoon is to give you a 5-minute briefing on water rights to serve as background for the other two speakers. I'm going to keep it very simple, and I'm going to read some of it from my notes so as not to stray into unnecessary detail. And I'm going to assume that City Club members are aware that we have a severe water shortage problems in Oregon, so I will not spend any time right now describing them. If you should want to learn more details, there is explanatory literature on the table on the way out. The public owns all of the water in the state. Anyone can obtain a right to use the public's water. With a few exceptions, that right is limited to 4 conditions. The first, that it be used for a specified beneficial purpose without waste. Second, that the use be confined to a specified area or acreage. Third, that the diversion not exceed a certain rate, usually expressed in cubic feet per second, and that the total amount diverted not exceed a certain number of acre feet. Fourth, that some diversions can occur only during certain times. Now, each water right is attached to the land of the user. You may own land along a river, but have no right to use the water in it, while a landowner several miles away may have established the right to use that water. When you sell your land, that right goes with it to the new owner. In the late 19th century, many conflicts arose over competing claims for water. Placer miners and ranchers fought bloody gun battles. And those claims came to be settled in the local courts by what has come to be known as the doctrine of prior appropriation. That's a long mouthful. It basically means first come, first served. All this was put into statewide law in 1909, but many of the established water rights date back to the 1850s and 60s. Under this doctrine, the oldest or senior water rights are the last to be cut off during a shortage. Last summer, for instance, in the John Day Basin, water diversions were regulated back to 1895 by August 13th. And that hurt some ranchers with junior rights. Starting in the 1950s, the state adopted minimum stream flows in certain streams which were drying up during the irrigation season and killing fish. Those minimums do not have the same standing in law as water rights. 3 years ago, the legislature allowed us to begin issuing in-stream water rights. And many of those minimum stream flows have been converted to in-stream water rights, with priority dates going back to when the minimum flows were adopted. New in-stream water rights are right now being considered for many streams, but they will have current priority dates. In other words, very junior priority dates. The dates they were applied for. Thus, they will be junior to all of the senior rights and not so much use to migrating salmon in dry years. This leads us to one of today's points of contention: how to guarantee that enough water will be in the streams for fish life and recreation uses during dry periods. The doctrine of prior appropriation is central to this issue and to everything else. Ranchers and industries have made large investments in their businesses. They count on being able to use the water they are entitled to, and they understand the risks of being cut off. The doctrine of prior appropriation is like a skeleton to which a body of regulatory muscle and sinew and vital organs is attached. Some critics of the doctrine say that this body is outmoded and needs some reconstructive surgery. We have also draped some protective clothing on this body in an attempt to correct some of the inherent flaws. This takes the form of new policies and rules for water use, which the Commission is presently in the middle of adopting for the whole state. In fact, at the Commission meeting this afternoon, we will adopt a new policy and rules for conservation and efficient water use. After a year of public hearings and considerable criticism and extensive revision, we are, for example, for the first time, defining what waste is. It's been in the law all this time. These new policies, in turn, serve as the guide for adopting management plans for the state's 18 major river basins. Now, some users see these policies and plans as restricting their water rights. Others see them as not going far enough in the public interest. But whatever we do, the Water Resources Commission cannot reduce any water rights that have been granted under the doctrine of prior appropriation, except in very narrow circumstances. I hope this is enough information to help you better understand what Kip Lombard and Tom Simmons have to say this afternoon. If you have any questions, perhaps we can handle them in the usual City Club manner. Tom Simmons will speak first.
Madam President, members of the City Club and radio audience, there is no person in the state of Oregon with whom I had rather debate this issue than Kip Lombard. Kip has served all Oregonians in the Legislative Assembly with distinction. He is an honorable man. But he and those he represents, like General Lee and his Confederate Army of the South, couldn't be more honorable in practice and more wrong in principle. We came here not to bury Caesar. We did come here to bury Caesar, not to praise him. To understand this debate, it would be helpful to understand the history of how we got to where we are today. When the American frontier moved west, stimulated by prospects of free land, free water, and gold for the taking, it brought along a unique society, the pioneers of the American West, people in search of the great American dream, people seeking their fortune. Fortune then, as today, was to own property and to make money, and for some to build a new America. To them, the possibilities seemed limitless. Land, water, and all other natural resources were available, waiting to be claimed by the first in line. Resources seemed infinite. If resources were exhausted in one region, the pioneers continued west to new frontiers. The concept of conservation did not exist. Therefore, extravagant portions of our natural resources were claimed to compensate for natural losses. Water was no exception, and therein lies the root of today's problem. Let us take a little closer look at this 1855, and that is the date that I find that the doctrine of prior appropriation really originated. And the 1909 laws implementing the doctrine from a public policy viewpoint. First, let us compare it to other events and doctrines in American history. Please note that the doctrine was invented before the Civil War. One of the major claims for the justification of that struggle was one of economic necessity, as it is with the doctrine of prior appropriation. But there has been no emancipation proclamation to save the people from the tyranny of this doctrine. There has been no Brown versus Board of Education for the rights of streams and salmon. Americans have enacted sweeping legislative policy on water quality, such as the Clean Water Act, while ignoring water quantity because of the doctrine. But without water quantity, there can be no water quality. The wigwam burners that polluted Oregon's air have come and gone, but the doctrine lives on. Oregon's priceless beaches have been protected for the use of the people, but Oregon's stream, salmon, and steelhead have been decimated by the doctrine of prior appropriation. The doctrine in itself is inherently wasteful because there's a rule in it that says use it or lose it. If a water right was granted for 10 acre-feet in 1909 and is not used in its entirety, the water right is subject to being lost for non-use. This encourages use of water whether it is needed or not, and it discourages conservation. The doctrine is based on the faulty premise that water is an unlimited resource. The laws implementing the doctrine are based on the same faulty concepts. We should note that most of Oregon's waterworks, that is irrigation districts, the storage facilities and the canals, were built in the 1920s and 30s and were built to those 1909 standards. They are wasteful. Water is free. That is probably the biggest waste of all. Except to municipal users, water is free. 90% of the water diverted in the state is for agriculture, and not 1 cent is paid to the public for the use of this water. A modest fee on water needed to serve current uses should be required to pay for conservation measures. A penalty fee on waste would virtually eliminate waste. Paradoxically, it is this waste that could and should provide stream flows for Oregon's seriously troubled streams and salmon. The recovery of waste is a major source of water for stream flowers to support public uses such as fish, wildlife, and recreation. The doctrine is very inflexible. It assumes that water rights are granted in perpetuity. They are not subject to review for virtually any purpose. Water rights are considered a private right by most users, even though the water of the states belong to all the people. We know of no other permits issued by the state that are not subject to review. The doctrine stifles future economic growth. It has placed most of the available water of the state in the hands of one industry, only one, and that is agriculture. Note, municipal, industrial development has already been curtailed along many rivers in the state, including the Tualatin, Bear Creek in Jackson County, and several other rivers because of the lack of stream flows needed to assimilate pollution abatement, pollution discharges. Let's look at its environmental impact. The doctrine looks backwards rather than forward. It does not allow for future societal needs for water such as fish, recreation, pollution abatement, and scenic values. An example, the number of salmon in the Columbia River system have declined from a historical high of approximately 15 million to approximately 3 million now. Over 100 populations of anadromous fish have gone extinct in the Columbia River system since 1850. There are sharp declines in both the salmon and the steelhead in all major rivers in Oregon. The situation is critical. It is so critical that the state must now engage in a long and expensive stream flow restoration program. This crisis, though, is not unexpected. As early as the mid-1940s, the Oregon state engineer warned citizens that all surface waters in the state had been given away and that no more water rights should be issued. Despite that warning, the state continued and continues today to issue water rights at an alarming rate. During the decade between 1975 and 1985 alone, 23,000 water rights were granted for private use. In all, over 50,000 surface water rights have been granted, while only 522 public in-stream water rights have been granted, and many of those came too late and are too little. The doctrine of appropriation in its present form is a failed system. It must be overhauled. Caesar deserves no praise, but he does deserve a state burial. The doctrine is man-made. Therefore, it can be changed by man with proper precautions to assure due process and allow time for change. Americans have historically found ways to dismantle legal and institutional doctrine that become an unacceptable burden on society. To this end, we are proposing a fish restoration and water conservation program to the next legislative body, which will do the following. Establish in-stream water rights in all streams of the state at levels necessary to protect fish. prohibit over-appropriation or pollution, require conservation to eliminate waste, recover any waste and transfer that waste to in-stream use, require periodic review of existing and future water rights for beneficial use without waste, require fish screens and fish passes on all diversions within a reasonable time, create a river basin authority in each river basin of the state to implement the act on the ground, create a fee among all users of the state, a water user's fee, create a conservation trust fund to manage these fees and finance the program that I have outlined herein. I am very pleased that there is a reasonable chance that this can be done at the next legislative session. KIP and the Oregon Water Resources Congress are earnestly negotiating with public interest groups to resolve this critical issue. If we cannot agree and the legislature does not act, the walls of the doctrine of prior appropriation, like the walls of Babylon, will surely come tumbling down by the battering ram of public opinion at the ballot box. However, we must remember certain things. We must embrace these imperatives in making these changes. Oregon's agriculture is essential to the future of all Oregonians. The rural communities of Oregon who are now dependent upon agriculture are under stress and in some cases, like the salmon, are in danger. The doctrine of prior appropriation is the foundation upon which agriculture in Oregon was built. But on the other hand, the doctrine is also the albatross around the neck of rural communities because it places most of a very limited water supply in the hands of a very few. This inhibits economic diversity, limits development, tourism, and it will certainly impair the livability of some communities. It is of no benefit to blame anyone for the current situation. The solution lies in enactment of a law that is directional to all state agency and enforceable by the public. Oregonians cannot wait. If we do, we will surely find that some doctrine invented by California miners in 1855 has destroyed the very foundation of our Oregon society. Thank you.
Thank you for this opportunity to appear before you once again. Some of you may recall about 7 years ago, after I finished my term in the legislature, I spoke before you on certain water issues, and needless to say, things have heated up considerably since that time. I didn't wear my 6 guns today, nor my hat, nor my cowboy boots. The last person who came from the Rogue Valley and did that, or something akin to that, was either misperceived or had some misperceptions and ended up not only losing his office, but ended up in some court battles up here recently, and I did not want to give you any misperceptions about where I live, where I come from, and so forth. Tom, I don't think you have come here to bury Caesar. You've come here to bury agriculture and the farmer together with the logger. I think that there are some things to be said in defense of the appropriation doctrine. Let me add that beyond what Roger said about that doctrine, I want to point out another factor about it. One of the reasons it developed historically was because, unlike the East, most of the lands in the West were a far distance from the water courses. And so it required the expenditure of a considerable amount of time, energy, effort, money to get the water to those lands, to develop those lands. And one of the justifications for the doctrine was simply that if you were going to expend those funds to transport that water to your lands, then you ought to be entitled first in time, first in right. And a lot of people in Oregon have made that investment. Now, how has this doctrine worked historically? Certainly some of the things that Tom has pointed out, I will concede. Some of the things that Roger's pointed out are true. One of the things about our water resource and how we have been able to extend it the way we have is that the water that is appropriated is not simply appropriated on a 24-hour basis during the period of an irrigation season for most users. Your water rights certificate, if any of you have ever seen one, says that you're entitled to divert so many cubic second feet of water, or in the case of rotation, and you get a maximum amount of water. And quite frankly, what has happened is that frequently water users will divert an amount, water their land, shut their water off, and the next person downstream, or the next junior user, will be able to use that. And yes, what has happened, in fact, in many of our streams is that there are so many users who are using the water and reusing the water that there is little left in the stream itself. That's history. Let me jump for a minute to agriculture itself. What importance should we attach to irrigated agriculture in this state? Right now, agriculture is ranked second in our economy, and I dare say possibly to become first. Let me also remind you of Oregon's land use policy, which is so strenuously supported, I know, by many of you in this area, and the primacy that that policy gives to the maintenance of agricultural lands. If we're going to tell landholders that you have to hold your land in exclusive farm use and you can't do anything else with it, then by golly, we ought to have a water policy that is consistent with a land use policy that provides the wherewithal to those people who own that land to make a living from that land. According to the USGS National Water Survey published in 1987, in 1982, irrigated farms in this country comprised approximately 12% of all farmlands, but produced over a third of all of the agricultural product. How much water does agriculture use in Oregon? Not counting the Columbia River. According to recent figures produced by the Water Resources Department, the average annual runoff in Oregon streams and rivers is 76.1 million acre feet. The estimated irrigation diversions from that is 11.2 million acre feet. The one problem with that it really creates, however, is that the average runoff between the months of April and September, which are most of your irrigation months, that runoff is only 21.6 million. And so what you can see is agriculture, like a lot of other needs that water, unfortunately, during the time when it's not available. The problem is in matching supply and demand. I think that most of agriculture, and certainly the districts that I represent, recognize the demand of the public for more water in stream during periods of low flow. And so the issue really is, how are you going to get this water in the streams, and does it require abandonment or major surgery to the appropriation doctrine? As an aside, and I think this was pointed out well by Roger, the recent legislation providing for the enactment and allowing us to quantify in-stream water rights really isn't going to put more water in the stream, because those rights are going to take their position in time along with the other appropriative rights. I would say there are 5 general ways in which you are going to enhance flows in streams in this state. Number 1, storage. I'm going to itemize these and then come back in the brief time I have just to give you my thoughts very quickly on these. Secondly, conservation and improving of efficiency. Thirdly, watershed enhancement. Fourthly, the recapture and reallocation of existing rights. And fifthly, perhaps, the use of exchange and reuse of waters. Storage. Personally, I don't think we give a high enough priority to that in this state at this time. It certainly offers the most volume for improvement in some areas. It's not appropriate in all areas, but in many areas it may be. Storage, to promote storage, doesn't require that we abandon or change the appropriation doctrine. We build the facilities, we build multi-purpose facilities, we allocate the waters from those facilities between both in-stream and out-of-stream uses, and I think we can provide some satisfaction to everybody. I'm going to jump over conservation for a moment and just briefly touch on watershed enhancement. Both the agricultural community as well as the in-stream community have supported that and do support that. And while the benefits may be somewhat limited, we are already embarked at various stages on watershed enhancement in this state. That doesn't require a change in the doctrine of prior appropriation. When you get to conservation, for irrigation, that means improvements in delivery, improvements in application, improvements in management. Keep in mind the doctrine that Roger and Tom both alluded to, the doctrine under the prior appropriation doctrine that says you are entitled to the beneficial use of water without waste. It is the view of the current policy in the department and the commission that that doctrine, that law, provides plenty wherewithal, plenty framework to mandate conservation measures and to get very actively involved in conservation. And in fact, as Roger alluded to this afternoon, the Commission is going to be adopting a conservation policy that has been worked on over the last year and a half. The concerns of agriculture, I feel, are not so much in do we have conservation and improved efficiency or not. The concerns relate to things like costs. The costs of pumping become very, very high. Costs that in many instances the farmer alone or the irrigation district alone simply cannot bear. The feasibility of changing methods of application. You know, everybody seems to think that drip and sprinkler irrigation may be the answer to all of our problems. In many instances it may be. Over half of the irrigated lands in Oregon are already sprinkler irrigated. But in some areas, for some crops, sprinkler irrigation is just not feasible. If you sprinkler irrigated certain row crops in Jackson County in August, you'd burn them, and that would be it. We're concerned about some of the side effects that have developed over the years, some of the hydrologic dynamics, such as recharge, return flows, reuse of water. You know, in many of our districts, for example, in the Klamath Basin, water is reused over 7 times by various agricultural users in line. But being mindful of those, there is no reason why we cannot actively and aggressively pursue conservation in this state, I feel, without a change in the appropriation doctrine. The one area that would, I think, probably require, in fact, would require significant changes in the appropriation doctrine is in the area of recapture and reallocation. Tom mentioned previously abandoned water rights or wasted water. If you leapfrog those rights ahead of the other junior rights that have long since developed and made their investments, then yes, you're going to create a great deal of upset in the appropriation doctrine and in the system. And I suggest to you that, like it or not, people have relied on this system, have expended monies, have developed their agricultural lands, and it is not good policy now simply to leapfrog those users who have developed those systems. I think there are other and better ways. Finally, the matter of exchange and reuse. I think there's some bright possibilities here. You're talking in this area about this possibility in the Tualatin Basin, about the ability of agriculture perhaps to use treated waters from municipalities. The volumes are not great. The quantities are somewhat limited, but I think the possibilities are great, particularly in the urbanized and urbanizing areas. You look only at the Arizona experience to see how it has worked. There are other ways than radically changing the appropriation doctrine. Thank you.
Chuck Williams has the privilege of the first question. Is Chuck here? He's not. All right. All right. Why don't you come up and ask your question? Chip Greening, member of the Board of Governors, will ask the first question.
When I came here, I thought I was going to hear a lot about water, and what I found is that I heard that we have another agricultural subsidy that I wasn't even aware of. And I must admit, I didn't know until Mr. Simmons said it that that water users are getting the water for free. And this made me think of the current talks at GATT, in which the United States is urging, along with Southern Hemisphere agricultural producers, the end of agricultural subsidies, especially in Western Europe. And yet we continue to subsidize here. Power users subsidize irrigators. The federal government subsidize agriculture with price supports and other mechanisms. Now another subsidy. Can Mr. Simmons or Mr. Lombard explain to me why we should yet again be subsidizing agriculture with free water and by tolerating wasteful practices?
Is this on? Okay. First of all, I'm not espousing the tolerating of wasteful practices, so I'm not going to defend that. I can't defend it. I don't think any of us can. They happen. We can't defend them. We can only try to improve on them. But this concept of water for free, any of you fishermen pay for your water? Do any of you boaters pay for your water? No, you don't pay for it any more than agriculture does. In fact, I would suggest less. Because the water, for instance, a lot of the water that is used by irrigation districts is stored water behind dams built by the Bureau of Reclamation, the cost of which, granted without interest, but is paid for by the users. Do you pay for the use of putting your boats in those recreation lakes, for fishing in those lakes? No, you don't, unless you happen to pay a campground fee. So let's look at this concept of free water. But even if you were to attempt to market or put a value on that water, the one thing I would say as it relates to agriculture, you enjoy the cheapest food in the world. Now, if the farmers could pass on to you the costs that you want them to pay for, if you want to put it at a market value for water, I think you'd probably find many of them agreeing to do so. But unfortunately, the farmers in this country, and particularly in this state, don't have that kind of market power to pass that on to you. And I'm afraid if you start putting too much of a price on it, you're just going to price the Oregon farmer out of the market. And I don't think you want to do that.
Would you like to comment, Mr. Simmons?
Yes, I would like to make one comment. No one has any interest in putting agriculture out of business or even placing undue burden on them. But I think if you look at this doctrine and the laws implementing this doctrine, you will find this whole program the original welfare program in America. I think it was the first one ever invented, and it continues today. I think it's important to understand that we have not changed this doctrine from its inception one iota. It dominates the state today.
Okay. Regina Hauser will have the privilege of the second question.
This question is for Mr. Simmons. You indicated that you have legislative proposal or legislation proposed. How does that legislation determine who will have the prior right? And in times of extreme shortage, who is the ultimate prior user?
The priorities will stay as they are today. We do not wish to disrupt the priority system. From my personal viewpoint, that's the only thing good I can find about the doctrine of prior appropriation, because it does lend order. It's not always the right order, but it is an order. So I think that is very important. What we would hope to do is, someone has a 1900 water right, and it's very wasteful. We would hope to capture that wasted water out of that 1900 water right, keep the priority date on it of 1900, and move that priority date into the stream as of that same day. Does that answer the question?
Any comment, Mr. Lombard?
No, I think I spoke to that earlier when I raised our concern about leapfrogging, and that's exactly what that would do. you may have that water right that's an 1800 or early 1900 water right, and many water rights issued for subsequent junior users who've in fact developed their facilities, planted their trees, started irrigating their crops and what have you. And if you leapfrog the in-stream water right over those rights, then those are the people who are going to suffer. And that, yes, in fact, does change the priorities completely.
Question?
I had a comment.
Sure.
I think that the way this is going to be solved in certain critical basins is for fees to be charged, put into a state fund, administered perhaps by Water Resources or some other entity, and that money be used to buy or lease the water rights that are senior enough so that the water can actually be put back into the stream. That water right is a property right. There's a market value for it, and that way the general public, or the users, if they're the ones that contribute to the fund, will be paying for the water going back into the streams. If the leapfrogging position is used, then the junior water right holders are the ones who will pay for that water going back into the streams, and I'm not convinced that that's a fair way to do it. This is a very complex issue, but it's one that I can tell you the Water Resources Commission is trying to address right now.
Don Wagner, member City Club. Recognizing that one could have rates which would indeed put all agriculture out of business, but is there a level which is perhaps modest, which would provide something and would let you get going in terms of conservation that would be acceptable to the agricultural community? Is there a sense of some give and take there?
Mind you, I hesitate to speak, of course, for the whole agricultural community. I represent a number of irrigation districts, and we also have a broad range of feelings there. But yes, in this sense that Tom and I both are actively involved along with others, looking at ways that we can raise funds, that we can provide funds to help finance conservation measures. I don't think that you'll find agricultural totally opposed to that. What they would be opposed to is if that burden falls solely on the shoulders of agriculture. In other words, I think really what we're looking at more is maybe a broad-based funding type proposal where there is something for everybody and which will allow us to achieve some of these savings. I'd like to throw in also here that a number of the districts that I represent, at least up until November 6th of this year, were actively involved in looking at ways to increase the revenues from their own irrigation district patrons to make substantial improvements in systems. I'm sorry to say, but it looks to me like ballot measure 5 is going to put a tremendous halt right now to that, at least for the time being, until we can figure it out.
Any other comments, gentlemen? Steve?
Steve Shell, member. To my college roommate, Kip Lombard, suppose Mr. Simmons' initiative says, assume there is a set amount of water to be put in every stream for fish flows or whatever, and assume that there is conservation or recapture that is possible and can be mandated by the state. And assume also that there would be a recovery period in place 30 or 40 years for whatever improvements have been made for conveyance of water in a system. And that period had passed. Under those three assumptions, Kip, would there be a taking of water rights if the public mandated that recapture or conservation water go back into the streams without any cost?
Well, Steve, is the eminent land use lawyer that you are, since I already know, and since I know you're very familiar with the takings decisions of the U.S. Supreme Court, more familiar than I am, I might add. All I can say is we'd argue like hell, yes, it is a taking, but I suppose there might be some way that you might structure that to get by the law in terms of returning one's investment. I recall that was used in certain billboard cases, for instance, late in the late 70s when municipalities, I think like yours here, were attempting to get rid of the billboards by allowing them generously, quote, to amortize their costs over a period of time, and the courts did not buy that. You may have a similar problem with this type of case, but let me also add, you know, as a matter of public policy, is that what you want to do? If so, then you better make your land use policy in this state consistent with that policy as well.
May I comment on that question there? I don't see how anyone could conceivably come up with a logical answer that waste is taking, because it is the fundamental of the doctrine that we ignore in most cases, that it function on the basis without waste. Now, how on earth can waste become a taking?
Carl Anuta, I'm not with the club, but I was attracted by the fascinating speech. A question for both Mr. Bachman and Mr. Lombard. Since getting the money for irrigation improvement or resolving the problems with waste, as well as actively pursuing the conservation policies that the Water Resources Department feels they're beginning to initiate now after a number of years, will take a long time. What do we do about the streams that will die long before that cure ever gets there? Do we just give up on those particular species or particular streams, or is there some way in the interim period that we can, at least short-term, save the streams?
Right. You know, how do you make water in the short run, other than pray, try a rain dance? You know, you've probably got as many good answers for that as I do. I can tell you one thing that has happened, and certainly this is through a great deal of Tom's effort, and that is you don't allow any further appropriations in many of these, if not most of these areas. The Water Resources Commission has adopted an administrative rule that basically requires that it look at water availability in the case of all out-of-stream appropriations or applications for permits, and if the water isn't available, their general practice is not to allow those permits. Secondly, the in-stream water rights applications that are currently being made, those applications are not restricted by water availability except in a very general sense. The levels that are being requested there, and if granted, are pretty effectively in most of those streams going to cut out any further appropriations. So beyond stopping further appropriation in those streams, I don't think there's any ready, quick solution to put water back in those streams other than the Almighty Himself.
I, of course, do not agree with that.
A member of the club, and I want everyone to rest assured that my friend Carl Anuta, who failed to observe City Club protocol, will become a member before he leaves today. I'm trying to appreciate the enormity of the problem with respect to Oregon and its water resource. Apparently, all acknowledge that these farmers receive some sort of subsidy by paying a less than market price for their water, and I guess I either did not hear or did not understand what the value of that subsidy is. KIP has indicated they don't pay interest. My understanding, the Bureau of Reclamation contracts are 40 years. That obviously is a lot of money. I don't know what the state's policy with respect to that. And I would like somebody to tell me what the value of that subsidy is that we in Oregon, our taxpayers, are contributing to subsidize these farmers. And also, how many of these same farmers are also receiving price supports for the crops they grow? What's the value of that collectively in this state? And can somebody tell me approximately how much water in terms of percentage or volume we can save through instituting the kinds of conservation practices, Kip, that you apparently do endorse and acknowledge that apparently your clients would be willing to engage in, and how much water could be saved by merely discouraging farmers from...
I think we may get
You got
lost
it?
with all those questions. Let's take one. Give us your first question, okay?
what is the value what is the true value of the water, I guess, that we in Oregon are contributing to these farmers? What's the value of the subsidy we're making for?
Okay, thank you. Let's see if you guys can answer that.
I can't tell you what the value is. You know, I can tell you on a contract-by-contract basis what the farmers are paying off to the Bureau for the construction of the projects, but that's for the construction of projects and storage facilities. That's not for the water that is what we call so-called free water that is just diverted or pumped out of a stream. I can't tell you what that market value is. I don't know if anybody here can. You know, I hear all these talks about that the farmers ought to pay the market value for the water, but I too have never heard what that market value is of that water. If you want to look at what some other states are doing, and I don't know if we want to embark on this, but states like Colorado, Utah, and some of those states, there's a fairly active water marketing that's going on. And for instance, you'll find irrigation districts adjacent to Denver that don't need their water anymore, or selling them to selling their rights to the municipalities for some pretty darn good prices.
The situation varies from basin to basin. Over in the Owyhee Dam was built, or they started building in 1927. They opened it in 1933, and as Kip indicated, the cost of that dam's been being paid off by the irrigation district since 1933, but without any interest charged. I learned this summer that it's only half paid off. So the amortization rate is very, very low. In addition, they get a subsidy on power rates. And I won't go into that, but it's a considerable subsidy to those onion farmers over there. Let me cite one other situation that might help bear on the question that was asked. One of the critical problems is the Deschutes River below Bend in the summertime. It has very, very little water in it, about 50 cubic feet per second max. And that is donated by the Central Oregon Water District, Irrigation District. There are something like 11 proposed golf courses in that general area, and golf courses, as you know, are supposed to be green, and they consume a hell of a lot of water. At the same time, a huge percentage of the water taken by the Central Oregon Irrigation District is lost in the canal, but the district doesn't have the money to make the investment to plug the leaks. So there's talk of working a three-cornered deal, say to the golf course developers, if you'll pay for stopping the leakage, we can recapture that water, and the law says that at least 25% of that must go back in the stream, and then you can use the 75% to water your golf course, and that's a form of economic development. So the answer is very complex. It varies from stream to stream, but the value of that water to somebody, to a golf course developer, or to a potato processor is one of the things that's going to enable us to engineer some of these three-cornered deals that will put water back in the stream. They're very complex, and in some cases there are legislative barriers to doing it, but we're pursuing all of them.
Time for one last question.
I'm Arch Dye, member. I'd like to propose a relatively simple question that entails only simple arithmetic. The question is, how will this matter be considered and planned for? And here are the basic facts. All the figures represent annual flow from official USGS gauges. Figures are from the year 1989, except for one of the city, which is 1987, the last one available. One, the gauge above Marmot Dam on the Sandy is 1,360 cubic feet per second. The gauge below the head gate on the Bull Run, but above the confluence of the Sandy, is 775 cubic feet per second. The diversion through the city water pipeline is 1,909 cubic feet per second. That's for use by Portland to the municipality and to the satellite communities to which it sells for profit. The gauge below the confluence of the Bull Run is 2,370 cubic feet, the volume of the water through which the scenic wild, which flow through the scenic wild segments of the Sandy River. And this means that the water now allowed to escape down the Bull Run from the headgate now amounts to 30% of the scenic sandy water flow. It also means that if the metro city gross uses and demands all of the water rights it is entitled to, the salmon and steelhead fishing would be kaput. On the other hand, if all of the Bull Run water was allowed to pass through the Sandy, the increase would be 80% of the Sandy volume. Fantastic. The question is, how can this problem be handled?
I don't have to answer that. I'm the country boy, you're the city boy.
I don't know how that can be handled, but I think all of us should acknowledge the presence of Dr. Dyack, whose name was spoken, probably 40 or 50 times this morning when we considered the effects of the so-called Dyack decision on the setting stream flows for the John Day River. We aren't through. After lunch, though, we'll probably adopt a stream flow level which will effectively shut down any further appropriation in the John Day River, which is an appropriate thing to do. But we're going to be working on that arch with the city, and it's of interest that the present chairman of the commission has just taken a new job with the Portland Water Bureau to try to solve that very problem and regionalize that Bull Run water supply.
Thank you, gentlemen, for a very interesting topic and discussion. We are adjourned.